Hello, everyone, and welcome to LeeLa. I'm Lee Philbrook. The intention of the LeeLa community is to transform conversations and practices into actions that make a difference. And LeeLa comes from Sanskrit, and it means divine or creative play, and it literally translates to your story. And we love to tell others' stories. It's going to be an awesome show this evening. We're going to start it off with a little background on us, your hosts, followed by an opening intention. And then we have our special guest, Suzanne Sherkin. Suzanne will be discussing her new book, When Gender is in Question, A Guide to Understanding. And I love this quote from Suzanne's book. My hope and dream is that you will use your increased information and self-awareness to contribute to a world that is kinder, gentler, and more supportive of each other. Embracing difference starts in the heart. It emanates out easily once the glow has begun. Changing the world is possible, one heart glow at a time. I think that's absolutely beautiful, Suzanne. We're then going to do our closing intention and final announcements. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. I encourage you to keep your cameras on. It helps facilitate community and connection. And if you're eating or moving around, by all means, keep your camera off. We also love questions. So feel free to use the chat box or raise your virtual hand and we'll unmute you. So without further ado, here we go. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Lisa English.
Welcome to LeeLa, everyone. This is a place where you can all learn, explore, and most importantly, have fun. And we hope to inspire you all to live an intentional life. I'm a teacher, entrepreneur, and content creator. And I'm really excited to discuss the topic of gender tonight with Suzanne and Lee. As a high school teacher and with lots of friends in the LGBTQ+ community, it's important for me to gain a deeper understanding and, so I can support and advocate and be an ally for those who are on a gender journey. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it back over to my co-host. Here's Lee.
I'm a life and career transition coach. I work with people who don't love what they're doing in their job or career, and with people that have taken the leap of faith to follow their calling and want to clear blocks so they can make what they love to do sustainable. They tend to be people that are procrastinating, waiting for the kids to leave, waiting for things to change, waiting for the right time, waiting to be ready. My approach is heart-centered, uses leading neuroscience and energy work. I assist people to break through what is holding them back in life, gain clarity on the if only inside themselves. As a result of working with me, my clients report that they now have a sense of direction and movement. They feel relief at making decisions, taking action, and finally seeing real progress. They have a new sense of mental and physical freedom to move forward with clarity and confidence. In short, I empower people to think and live purposefully and create a life they love. I'd now like to do our opening intention that connects us and holds the space for the evening. Please close your eyes. May divine grace surround us, uphold us, and cherish us all. May it support us and our sacred trust and community. May we be strong together and our journeys be brighter and higher for having walked side by side. May we be guides for others and ourselves with clarity, tenderness, and light. Feeling gentle in our minds and clear with our words, sending peace in all directions of time. With gratitude, we take this moment to arrive and join together. Open your eyes. Welcome to the room. Now over to Lisa to introduce our special guest.
Suzanne Sherkin has recently published her first book, When Gender is in Question, A Guide to Understanding. She was inspired to write it when her youngest child transitioned from female to male, and it became clear that there was a significant gap in the public's understanding of the topic. She wrote the book she wished she had 10 years ago when her son began his transition. Suzanne is an experienced mediator, conflict coach, facilitator, and former journalist. She has been working with teams and leaders in the areas of effective communication, conflict resolution, and gender diversity for more than 20 years. Her expertise as a mediator is a significant benefit to helping address workplace issues of conflict, harassment, and stigma. She has spoken at numerous conferences on the topics of the neuroscience of conflict and gender diversity in the workplace. It is now my pleasure to welcome our special guest of the evening, Suzanne Sherkin.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Yes, let's kick it off right away, Suzanne. What inspired you to write your new book?
When I had a conversation one night with my youngest child who said to me, "Ma, I need to show you some things." And he proceeded to show me what was a series of, we would now call them blogs, I guess, just videos of people who were questioning their gender. So young people who were in the front of the camera talking about their gender questioning. Some of them had been undergoing some surgical procedures. Some of them were considering it. All of them were in a kind of existential crisis around what they were, who they were, what they were doing, what their gender was about. Anyway, after watching a series of these, my child turned to me and said, who then identified female, he turned to me and said, "Ma, I think I'm a guy." And that's what all of my questioning has been about. And that began my journey with him, to support him through his, what he didn't know what was ahead of him. None of us knew what was ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when it became clear what this transition process was about and what it held for him, I began to do some research and found that there was very little that spoke to me. There was a lot of material out there, but most of it was written by people who had gone through a transition. And there was no parent, there was no voice that what I knew now is a cisgender voice, someone who doesn't question their gender. No one in that. And so when I worked through the process and I had some time to reflect on it, I realized that I wanted to write about it.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. And you know, the other part of that was that so this was about 12 years ago. Skylar, my son, is now 33. And so when he was about 20 is when it began. You know, this was before Caitlyn Jenner. It was before Orange is the New Black. And so there was no parent that I could turn to, you know, no one that I could ask, what's going on in your family? And what I found was so many of my friends, my family, my coworkers, when they heard about this journey from Skylar, many of them who I felt were really liberal-minded, open-minded people responded by saying, "What? and you're being so chill about it. Wow, I don't know if I could be that chill about it. And it was actually that response that inspired me to write the book, because it seemed so natural for me to just support my child with unconditional love, whatever direction they were taking. And yet I had so many parents and people who I respected and valued for their liberal thinking question my liberalness. And then I realized then that there needed to be some information, some public education.
Amazing. And for those who haven't read Suzanne's book, it is very easy to read, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit. So yeah, even if you're not in the conversation, it is very easy to read. So love that about it. Can you talk to us a little bit about, Suzanne, how Skylar's journey impacted the family?
Yeah. So the family at the time was mother, father, and 2 kids. And the kids were 2 years apart, Skylar being the youngest. My oldest is a girl, is a daughter, and she and so the 2 kids have been close their whole life. And when Skylar began questioning his gender, and he came out as trans, wanting to move into his authentic gender identity, I think it was a bit of a relief for the family. I say it was a relief because before then, for years before then, during Skylar's early and late teens, they became very unwilling to participate in family. Skylar, when he was still identifying as female, or still showing up as female, was so uncertain about themselves, and so unhappy and uncomfortable in their own skin. I think I even wrote that in the book. They were just uncomfortable in their own skin. Going to a family event was a huge deal. Going out for dinner was a massive argument. So everything was an issue. Coming out of their room was an issue. And so answering the phone was an issue. Like, come on, the phone is right there. Can you not know? So once Skylar identified his true identity as a male and moved into that, there was this huge relief that the family now can be more integrated and united. And everyone was just unconditionally supportive.
Amazing.
And so I think the family actually operated more effectively than it did before Skylar came out, because it was uncomfortable for everybody not knowing how to be.
And can you speak to, in your book, you talk about the emotional phases that you went through on this journey. Can you speak to that, how you eventually got to that unconditional love and support?
Yeah, thank you for picking that up, Lisa. I know actually it was in the preface that I was sitting with this, and I actually thought that might be the subject of another whole book, and these emotions just sort of came out of me, and I wrote them down because they were so succinct then, and because now that I'm not feeling it, I couldn't have reminded myself of it, so I had to write it down. So the first was fearful, and why I was fearful was because there was my child who was identified at birth as female and grew really quickly and became and grew, sort of at the age of sort of 17, had size 12 feet and was this kind of awkward girl. And big dreads and just like not comfortable. And then recognizing that what their authentic nature was, the authentic gender was, moving into becoming that, expressing that. And I was fearful for them, because I know that out in the world, I and my family may have unconditional love, but there's certainly not unconditional love out there, particularly for someone whose gender is not easily identifiable. There's all nature and layers of discrimination and harassment and violence. And so I was fearful for my child being unconventional in that way. And then I became really defensive about my child when people would question me, my family, both my nuclear family and extended family and friends. They would question, how can you do this? How can you let him do it? I thought, let him do it? What? People were using were using language that I found difficult to navigate. And so I became very much of a defensive mother, defending my child against discrimination, whether it was microaggression, whether it was unconscious bias or overt. So with that, defensiveness became protectiveness. And then I got angry. And I think it was when I started to get angry that I began to feel that I need, this is a fight that I need to fight. Before then, I, like most people in my contemporary, didn't really think of transgender 12, 13 years ago. I mean, I'd seen a few movies, Boys Don't Cry, and a number of movies that were coming out, but not, but now I'm recognizing that I need to step up to this plate, because this is now personal. And then that anger moved into curiosity, and I started to question, okay, so how does that really happen? Like, how does one question? Why is my youngest child questioning and my oldest child not? And I got really curious. And then this, unconditional support, and then that moved into a kind of, public vocalness, and that's when I decided I would actually write about it and develop a business, or move my business around it. I go into workplaces and support transitioning people in the workplace and in families. So those are the 7 steps.
Yeah. What a beautiful journey. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about now some of the definitions that you write in the book. You do a really good job about, the vocabulary in there. So for those who are not in the conversation, it's important that we kind of cover a few of these. So can you tell us what the definition of cisgender and transgender is?
Yeah. So, I was glad to hear, Lisa, that you used the word accessible at the beginning, because that was actually the value, the value that I used to guide me. I wanted this to be accessible, easily understood, no barriers in language or information. And so it really comes down to those 2 definitions, the definition between cis and transgender. So here's how it goes. Here's what that's about. Someone who is, so actually, before I give you the definitions, I'll just tell you about the words, the etymology of them. So those are actually 2 Latin prefixes. So cis means this side of. Trans means the other side of. And there are no words with cis in English, but there are tons of words with trans in English. Like you would like you'd probably know them. Like,
Transversal is coming to mind.
Transversal, transportation, transmute, transformate, all these like tons of words, right? And so it means that there's moving to the other side of. So related to gender, A cisgender person is someone who is comfortable and in alignment with the birth, the gender that they were assigned at birth. And so that's a phrase that actually is used a lot now, and likely if you've read any of the literature around gender, you've come across that phrase, the gender assigned at birth. And that means that, you know, when a baby is pulled out of its mama's belly, you know, the genitals are clear, generally clear, and they'll say, oh, beautiful baby boy or girl, right? And so it's that is the gender that's written on your birth certificate. So that's what birth assigned gender means. And so when someone, it grows up and they feel that their birth assigned gender it was female, so I'll just use myself because I'm cisgender. I was assigned female at birth, and my whole life I've been comfortable. I've never once, the question has never formed in my mind, I wonder if I would be more comfortable as a boy. It's never crossed my mind. And because of that, I'm cisgender. There's this alignment of how I feel inside and how I am outside. Trans, on the other hand, is the opposite. So there are those people like Skylar who get to a certain point, whether it's 3 years old, because kids know at 3 or 4, or older, where they begin to question whether or not the genitals and the gender that they've been assigned is really who they are authentically. And once you begin to question that, whether or not you actually do anything about it, that makes you trans. So a trans person actually isn't someone who's gone through any surgical procedures or done anything. A trans person is someone who feels that they're not in alignment and congruency with their gender assigned at birth.
Right. Awesome. I love how you described the little prefixes too. That makes so much sense just from the English language. So thank you. Can you define for us what the acronym, we see it everywhere now, LGBTQ plus means, in case some aren't aware?
Right. That's, I knew you were going to ask me that. And so again, I had to write it down because there are so many letters, and so here's, it's often called just alphabet soup because there's so many letters to remember, and people get fussed about it, but I will go through it, but you really don't need to get fussed about it. So the L is lesbian, G for gay, B for bi. So you see all of these so far are sexual orientations, and then T for trans. So LGBT, so the T for trans, and then Q for queer or questioning. So the full, like there's and then there's an I and there's an A in there, but there is so here's actually the full acronym. If you were to write it out, it would be LGBTQ, I don't know if there's, hold on, LGBTQIPP2AA, or like, who wants to remember that? But in there are, queer and questioning, I for intersex, there's P for pansexual, there's two is for two-spirit, there's A for asexual and A for allies. So there's a whole mixture of gender identity and sexual orientation, which is why it gets so confusing and so long. But LGBTQ plus is just fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And you can find all those online. There's a lot of resources online for that, correct?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And I included the long one in my book, and because I have a definitions aspect, but
Great.
There won't be a quiz. Nobody's going to give you a quiz, so it's okay.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. Can you tell us what fixed or fluid means?
Yeah, fixed or fluid. No, those are terms that I know my one of my co-writers, I had two co-writers. One was Skylar, who wrote the foreword and a beautiful, very heart-based, wise foreword, and also a chapter about his journey. And then there was another co-writer I had, Dr. Helma Seidel, who is a long-time gender specialist as a psychotherapist, and she has written a chapter. She I think she uses those phrases a lot, those words a lot, fixed and fluid. That relates to people who feel that they, if you're fixed, and again, I don't think those are very commonly used phrases, but it's good to know. Fixed is when you just feel like you're one gender. So whether you are cis or trans, it's you go from one binary to another. If you're trans, you go from male to female, female to male, right? Or if you're cis, you are a binary, a male or a female. There are those people who feel that their gender identity is not fixed, that they have a very fluid identity of male, female, and everything in between. And so we can talk about gender in terms of the spectrum of gender identity, which I personally prefer more than fixed or fluid, but fixed or fluid identifies the action, but the spectrum of gender identity identifies the realm of thinking of it. And there are those who feel that they don't want to be, they don't fit into a binary of male or female, or some days they feel more male or female or somewhere in between, and they would call themselves gender fluid.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's actually a really nice transition into what we're going to talk about next. So we'd like to discuss some key concepts of gender identity next. Okay. So what is the difference between sex and gender? Kind of already talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's actually a great question, because that too that question gets at the heart of what this conversation is about. So our sex is what we are born with. Our sex is the genitals that identify whether we are male or female. How we think about that is really our gender. And so, gender is up here and our sex is our genitals, right? And so our genitals are not the only factors that identify what sex we identify. I mean, there's chromosomes and there's a whole lot of other aspects that come into it, but mostly we identify ourselves by our genitals, and so so gender is our attitude, our beliefs, our feelings about ourselves.
And is that the same as gender identity, or a little bit?
Yeah, and perfect segue, exactly. And so our gender identity is based on how we feel is our authentic gender. And so that's really that. So gender identity, and so it's sort of the discussion goes hand in hand with gender expression, because how we identify ourselves is how we believe and feel our personhood to be as a gendered being. And how we express that is is another, it reflects that, but it can be also a really political topic. So as a cisgender person, my gender identity is female, and I express myself in lots of different ways. You know, I ride a motorcycle, and so I can, you know, put on my leathers and have that kind of, you know, motorcycle look. And sometimes I can be, you know, in a dress and with a hat and flowers, and there's all kinds of different expressions. And certainly if you go anywhere around the world, women are expressing their gender in culturally accepted ways. Certainly me being you know, a motorcycle rider, if I were to go to another country, that would be a dangerous thing to be. And so I feel lucky that I can express my gender as openly as I want to. And I feel really lucky about that. When it comes to a trans person, someone who is someone who is transgender, that it so not so their expression may not match what their gender is, or what their sex is.
Right.
So someone who feels that they are male more authentically, but they're in a female looking body, their expression is going to be really challenged.
Right.
And maybe politically dangerous as well. So and I'll use Skylar as an example. So at the beginning, when Skylar was 20 and he was just beginning his questioning, and he did begin to move very gradually into his transitioning expression, wanting to express his male authenticity. This was before he had had any surgeries, before he had any hormone treatments. And so what he had to do, so that he could bring more congruity between his expression and his identity, was to make himself look less female and more male. And that's so difficult and so challenging, and in the end, dangerous. So on a physical level, he had to bind his breasts. And what that means is that he had to wear this really thick, heavy elastic band that would flatten his breast and go across your chest. It sounds really painful. And according to him, it was crazy painful. That often limited his breathing. But he did this so that he could, it would be a way at least that he could be more androgynous looking. He cut his hair. He used to have really long dreads that looked like forces of nature. They were amazing things, but he cut them to have more of a male haircut. His clothes actually didn't change that much because he always had a kind of male style to him. And now, you know, these size 12 feet that we're trying to fit into a female shoe suddenly were really easy to fit into male shoes. And so, right. So all that is to say, the difference between identity and expression can be a cavernous, can be a very difficult walk. For some people who are trans, who I interviewed a lot of people for my book, and I met this one person who he was identified male at birth and lived his life as a male, and married, had a wife and kids, and had a job, and and when he moved into his 50s, he recognized that he really was far more comfortable being a female, but knew that there was nowhere for him to express himself. He couldn't put on a dress, he couldn't put on earrings, he couldn't put anything on that would make him feel female. And so what he used to do was he would sometimes take a day off work, and he had this bag that he had in the car that was kind of hidden underneath and behind. And he would drive out to some park far away, and he would park, and he would change his clothes, and he would take off his male clothes and put on, and he had this dress, and he had earrings, and he had perfume and high heels and a purse, and he would just like walk, and she would then be her authentic gender identity on her terms, expressing herself in a way that felt safe, because there was nowhere else she felt safe doing that. And then at the end of the day would come, and she would go back and pack up her things and put them away under, and go back to their life. And so, yeah, expression.
Yeah, thank you. That I love the little stories there. That's a great connection. Helps me connect the dots. And it would be great to ask this question now, because it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. Why are bathrooms such an issue?
Oh, well, actually, you could probably imagine, after those few stories, you can imagine why bathrooms are an issue. Bathrooms are a huge issue because someone who is in the process of transitioning, or someone who has transitioned, may not fit the conventional expectation of gender expression. So I'll tell you two stories about Skylar that will answer your question. And I'll preface it by saying bathrooms are the most dangerous places for trans people, particularly male to female. Particularly, I guess both have their treachery. So Skylar, in those early days and years when Skylar was just beginning his transition, he didn't really feel comfortable going into a male bathroom, because his expression was still quite androgynous and he hadn't fully transitioned. And so he went into a female public bathroom. Well, there was a woman there who saw him and yelled and screamed that he was a predator, and called security, and was really incensed that he was there because he was clearly intruding in a female space, and he actually got thrown out of the bathroom. Sometime later, some months later, when he was farther along his the expression of his transition, he went into a male bathroom. Well, clearly he wasn't male enough for the guys who were in the bathroom, who followed him out and beat him up on the side, yelling and screaming obscenities that he was just, an inappropriate girl, and left him on the roadside. So those are just two small examples of the treachery that takes place in bathrooms, and how unsafe it is for trans people to be in public bathrooms, which is why there needs to be an effort to get universities and restaurants and public spaces all having gender fluid bathrooms. I mean, there's no real need to label a bathroom male or female. If there's single stalls, they can be gender fluid. But I guess in public spaces there needs to be. But in bathrooms, in wherever there are single stalls or family, there can be family gender neutral bathrooms as well. But and that's what trans people look for. And I know actually after those two incidences, Skylar was on a campus, and he university campus, and he said that, and there was one gender neutral bathroom, and he told me, I'm sure he didn't tell me lots of things, but he did tell me this, that he went out once and it was busy and he didn't know where to go. And so he became, I don't think he became agoraphobic quite, but he really thought a lot about where the bathrooms were. He really sussed out all the public bathrooms in an area before he went out, just so that he would be aware.
Yeah, I remember reading in the book, he said by the end, of his journey, he's still continuing it now, but the majority of it, he said he knew where all the safest washrooms were in multiple cities. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm sure that would be a similar story with any with most trans people. Yeah.
Are you seeing any changes in public spaces? I can probably count on one hand how many gender neutral washrooms I've seen to date. But
well, actually, Lisa, I do notice more. I notice them on university campuses for sure, because I go to those places often to speak and do training, etc. So university campuses are very aware of this, and restaurants there are still male female bathrooms. So yes, there are pockets, but I think it's becoming an increasing workplaces. There's more pressure on workplaces to have a gender neutral washroom than ever before. May not be convenient, but at least some, workplaces are beginning to think in those terms, bit by bit, small steps.
Yeah, that's great. And my final question for you, Suzanne, before Lee takes over, is how has the use of pronouns been one of the catalysts for awareness about trans issues? And that's, even on Instagram now, you have the option to post your pronoun in your profile, which is amazing. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, pronouns are a really interesting thing. So a person in transition does not want to be misgendered. And so identifying their pronouns is really important to them so that they're not misgendered. Having said that, I know some trans people have revealed to me that identifying pronouns actually outs them in a way, because if they haven't fully transitioned, and they want to suddenly use or beginning to use a different pronoun than people are used to, so that there is that piece about when you come out and your name change and your pronoun change and all of that. I think it's great that we are now becoming much more aware on a general level, though, of the pronouns to use. And the three sets of pronouns are he, him, she, her, and they, them. And I know when they, them began to be part of the lexicon in this discussion about gender identity and gender diversity, there was huge pushback because people said, wow, that's not appropriate. Them, they, them it's a plural pronoun. You can't just adopt it for, well, it has been adopted, and very cleverly, because when you use the pronoun they, them, you don't need to identify. It doesn't need to be binary. And in fact, they, them is a great pronoun when I talk about Skylar prior to his transition, I will use they, them, because I can't bear to use she because it's not appropriate. And I can't use he because they weren't expressing as he then. And so I use they, them. And so the takeaway with pronouns is that if you don't know someone's pronoun, either ask them by saying, what pronouns would you prefer? Which is a question people are used to now. If you don't feel that's appropriate, use their first name, simply. And so that's the thing about, we can go on and talk about the political backlash around pronouns, but I don't want to take up all the time talking about it. But suffice it to say that now that people are more tuned into it, there is less misgendering, I feel, and more consciousness.
Great. Yeah, the great little tip there about if you don't know what to say, ask or use their name. Love that. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks. Suzanne, I'd love if you could speak to what some of the struggles you experienced and watched Skylar experience during his transition. I know you touched on some of those as we were talking earlier.
What some of the struggles he experienced? Yeah, I don't really want to speak on his behalf, but I will say that when he began to show up more in his authentic male identity, he was way more comfortable in his skin. I know that sometimes he would come to me because he was still living in Toronto at the time, and he would just say, "Ma, so like, can I wear this with this? Is this like how am I supposed to dress?" Right? And he would just ask questions about general clothing and styling. He was trying to move find his comfort in his body and his mind and his spirit, and that just gave rise to levels of uncertainty, I think, just in how to behave in public. And as he found his voice, I would say that he was just finding his voice, literally and figuratively, and then the outward presence around bathrooms. I can't speak more on his behalf because I know that he didn't share a lot of his struggles, but I do know that there were many dangerous situations for him. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about people being keen to identify someone's sex, and that it makes us uncomfortable when we can't easily identify someone's sex. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing that you picked up. And so it's very curious about we human beings that we all want to know who someone is initially related to their sex. Are they male? Are they female? Or are they something in between? Right? We need to know that. And when we don't know that, like when someone appears androgynous and we can't figure it out, or when you see someone with breasts and a beard and that doesn't kind of quite jive, we get really uncomfortable. And that has a lot to do with kind of the neuroscience of who we are. And basically it's because we are, as animals, mammals, we are geared to be in high risk, to manage our risk. And we want to know what's safe and what isn't. We want to come away we don't want to be anyone's lunch. We don't want to be overtaken. We want to be safe, and anything that is uncomfortable, anything that is different is uncomfortable. And so that's really what's taking place. So it's about survival, it's about mating, it's about relationship. We all want to know how to relate to one another. We want to know if you're friend or foe. We want to know if we need to protect ourselves against you. We want to know if we're going to be in competition with you. And these are just like back brain, old brain instinctive things. And so when we are not sure of someone's sex, it makes us uncomfortable, and discomfort leads to sometimes really bad behavior.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, and people not understanding why, and that acting out because they don't know where it's come from.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's really at the source of discrimination and harassment and violence, is anything that does not, for some people and some cultures, anything that doesn't fit within a very narrow frame of reference of expectation around gender is not acceptable. And in some people's country, not acceptable means worthy of destruction or harm. And so there are some countries that have just really heartbreaking stats around the amount of violence that is done to trans people. It's really, really difficult. In fact, one of the goals I have in my book is to translate it into 2 languages, maybe more, but initially 2. One is in Portuguese, so I can distribute it in Brazil, and the other is Spanish, so I can distribute it in Latin America. And those are 2 really key areas that have a lot of antagonism towards non-binary or transgender people.
And with that, why particularly those countries?
Because they have the highest stats of violence and death, but really violent. I mean, there is, in every single country, including Canada, there are significant stats of violence towards trans people. But those countries seem to have particularly dark violence.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to now ask you, what should parents know for a child who is questioning their gender?
That's a great question. What should parents know about a child who is questioning their gender? First, they should listen. They should know. So they should know that the child knows themselves. And a child who is questioning their gender is reflecting their authenticity. And that's why there are so many stories and statistics now around children as young as 4 years old saying, no, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, or I'm not a boy, and before this, nobody listened to them. They weren't being listened to, because who thinks, a child doesn't know what they're thinking? Well, in fact, a child knows exactly what they're thinking and feeling. And we are blessed to be at an age when parents in some pockets, some countries, are beginning to actually honor their children's voices. So that's what a parent needs to know. They don't need to know anything else except that that their child has a voice of authenticity. And it doesn't mean that that everything a child says needs to be, believed and honored about how they feel. But when it comes to gender, if a child is presenting this conversation, then the parent, the best the parent can do is be with them, work with them, listen to them, question them, invite them into a conversation, and move on the journey together, learn together.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. I have a girlfriend who has a daughter who's a tween, and she started talking about this. And I think what's so great is the conversation is happening in schools. She doesn't think that this is what she's considering, but she's questioning, like, maybe I am. And so to actually have that open dialogue, I think is so phenomenal, because it wasn't something that was even in our awareness when I was growing up anyways. So
Yes, exactly, Lee. Not only not in our awareness, but not in our opportunity. There were, I mean, kids weren't listened to in the same way that they are today.
mhm.
Yeah.
My next question is, if transition is needed or desired, when should it be started? What is your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's a very contentious question.
Okay.
So for parents who have kids who are questioning their gender at a young age, puberty or pre-puberty, there are hormone blockers that can be given, just so that it gives you time. Basically, hormone blockers allow the body to develop in all other ways, but just not hormonally. And so breasts won't develop, or scrotum won't develop, parts of the body won't develop. It will just allow the child to sort out their identity, right, without any harm done. Not harm, that was the wrong word, without any surgical or permanent processes being done. In the States, they're really freaked out about even hormone blockers, and there's been a lot of laws passed in different states that prevent even hormone blockers from being used before 18. So that, but I would say that there is no right time. Every single transgender journey is different. And actually Schuyler made that point a number of times in the book, that he's not speaking for anyone else but himself, and he's not speaking for all trans people, and I'm not speaking for all mothers of trans children either. Every single journey is the same. And so I would say that for a parent or grandparent, or a sibling of or an ally of someone who is questioning their gender, to seek some medical support and get advice, get support from the medical profession. That can be a challenge in and of itself as well, because there aren't really a lot of doctors who know this field very well. More and more so. For example, there's only a very few number of doctors in the country who do gender affirming surgery.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you have to really seek them out. There are only a few doctors or GPs who actually know this material. Schuyler had some really difficult stories to tell me when he wanted to begin his testosterone treatments, his T-shots, and he would go to many doctors who claimed that they knew or they were trans friendly. And he said, most of the time I ended up telling them what more information. And I even had doctors like reading the pamphlets, like not knowing anything about the topic. So that was a real frustration. And, you know, to that point, Lisa, that, you know, you asked me about some of the challenges, that would have been one of the challenges that he had, is not having, not easily finding medical support. So, but I would say that it's important to find not only allies, but people who can really take you through the medical system and help you navigate the medical system. Yeah.
That sounds like a really important piece as well, as you start to get your voice out there and talk to this, that's a huge gap, it sounds like, at this moment in time. And with that being said, what percentage of the population is transgender?
Wow, that's a great question. When I began my research, I'm not going to give you an answer, but I'll tell you, and I'm going to tell you why. When I began my research in the book, you know, 5-6 years ago now, everything I read everywhere said 1% of the population was trans and 99% were cis. We haven't even talked about intersex, which are people who have unclear genitals, unclear identification of genitals, and so who have both male and female in them. So I thought, you know, 1%. And then I contacted Dr. Helma Zeidel, and we talked about it, and she went ballistic when she, you know, read initially what I had to say and was talking about this 1%. She said, absolutely not. We are, you know, if you continue with 1%, I will not contribute to this book. And so we talked about it, and she was absolutely right. I mean, how do you get this 1%? This 1% are people who are identifying themselves in the medical profession, and only some of them, and only those who feel safe that they can identify, and only those who have a medical profession to identify with. And so right away, you're already, you know, limiting the number of people who can actually show up. And what about all the people who don't have medical procedures?
Right.
So, you know, so there is no answer to that question.
No, and again, that's so great to know. It's like the guy that you talked about who hid stuff, you know, in his car, right? Because that's not going to be accounted for.
Exactly. And he was transgender. He was as trans as Skylar is. Sky just has gone into more surgical methods for full expression. He's expressing in his little way. But yeah, he ain't showing up anywhere on any chart. Yeah.
I'd love to just touch a little bit. I know we talked a little bit about the workplace and what issues do you see the trans community facing in the workplace?
So the workplace is where I've done a lot of work around the country. And I would say that there is an increasing openness in the workplace to support all diversity, including gender diversity. I mean, in 2012, I guess the federal human rights law changed to add gender diversity as part of human rights protection. So actually, all workplaces by law need to support trans and gender diverse people, all diverse people by law. So everyone, all workplaces, if they have five or more people, they have to have a health and safety committee, and they have to have health and safety policies, and right. So that's the legality of it. The operationalness of it is slightly different. And again, there are pockets in Toronto where, you know, where we are completely blessed because we are in the most diversity in the world. And workplaces, mind you, not all workplaces, but a majority, but a significant workplace culture now is supporting gender diversity. and being open. And I know that because I'm doing work for lots of large and small corporations, and I'm hearing about the kind of gender training that's going on. Places, in different provinces around the country may not be as open and as progressive. Having said that, I worked with a very small a company in a really small town in one of the western provinces. It was a farming town, and there was this wonderful young trans woman who came out. Probably and such courage, and it takes huge courage really to come out and say I'm trans, particularly in an environment that is conservative and religiously has a religious overlay of non-acceptance. And they came out, and I did some work with the management and the staff, and it was just a thing of beauty. Everyone was just chill and accepting, and it was great. And so I'm my sense of optimism of acceptance and integration of gender diversity is in fact growing.
That is so wonderful to hear. It's really heartwarming, and what you're doing is so important. I want to ask you this last question and then open it up to the room to ask you questions. Where do you want to go with this book and your journey now, Suzanne?
Well, yeah, thanks for asking me that, because that's a really important, that's become a new journey for me. Up to now, I have had this book journey and this publicly vocal pride that I've been having, and then I've had my business of mediation and coaching, etc. And now I'm recognizing that I actually want to be more authentic myself, and where I am now leading myself and my work is to support families. And I'm going to be using my mediation and my coaching skills to support families to have difficult conversations. And that's and to help them and embrace them and provide language for families, because when we talk about families, it could be a parent transitioning, or a partner in a relationship, or a child or a sibling or a community member, and how do you have these conversations? They can be difficult and challenging, and it takes courage to have them. So my hope is to provide some skill and some direction and support for families.
It just seems like you have the perfect marriage of all the skills. It's like your whole life has been this journey to come to this place to do this important work at this important time.
Yes, thank you.
When I talk about that, I feel that it's like, whoa, it's just, it's your, soul's purpose. It feels like to me, I don't know. That's, as it came out of my mouth, I just went, wow, like it's so important right now.
Yes, and it feels like Skylar, well, all our children are gifts. And it feels like this journey that Skylar's on has been a gift for me personally, because that's exactly right, Lee. I've just been able to now move into using all of my communication and coaching skills for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a gift for all of you, to move through this and together create such a beautiful conversation out there. And Skylar is so eloquent in the forward and the parts that he wrote in the book. Wise beyond his years. At that age, I think would have been able to articulate, my life and what I've experienced. And so, yeah, being a very proud mother, I imagine.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't have done that at 33. So it's wonderful to read his work still. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to open up, the chat. If there's anyone that has, wants to pop a question in the chat box, or if you want to put up your little virtual hand and you can unmute yourself. Okay, David. Yeah.
It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm so glad I came here this evening. Okay, a couple questions. I'm, as you can tell by the beard and stuff, I'm kind of old school. But I'm just wondering, what is the difference between gender fluid and non-binary? Or is there a difference?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you for asking. I know all these terms can be really confusing. So non-binary. Let's start with gender fluid. So gender fluid, as I talked about earlier, fixed or fluid. So fluid is someone who feels very untethered to being identifying as male or female. I think that's a really good word. They feel untethered by it, and they just it's like that, like a flow. They feel that they can flow between a male and female spirit. I mean, our very wise Indigenous brothers and sisters had it right when they called people to spirit, who they identified as children who embodied both male and female nature. So, I mean, we all do, but who express them more openly. And so someone who is fluid is just, they would use a they pronoun for sure, they, them, because they don't want to be likely they don't want to be identified as only male or only female. So that's the kind of fluidity. And non-binary is it means that they don't identify clearly as male or clearly as female. So male, female are sort of the binary the posts between this spectrum of gender identity. And so if you're non-binary, then you're somewhere in the middle. But a gender fluid person might be flowing within the spectrum. A non-binary person might be fixed, but not within, but between somewhere. I know it all sounds so kind of.
So, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you because I have a feeling you'll know the correct answer. What is the difference between gender fluid and bisexual?
Gender fluid and
bisexual.
Oh, bisexual. Oh, okay. So that's we didn't even get into the difference between sexual identity and sexual orientation and gender identity. So gender fluid is so these are apples and oranges. Gender fluid, as we talked about, is identifying somewhere within the spectrum, moving in the spectrum of how they feel about themselves, how they feel their gender expression is. That has nothing to do with who they are attracted to with their sexual orientation. So our sexual orientation is very different from our gender identity. People conflate that all the time, and I can understand why it can get a bit confusing when people change their gender and or not change their gender when they move into their authentic gender identity. And are they attracted to the same people or different people? That's another part of our human curiosity. We really want to know who others are sleeping with. We really want to know, who other people are attracted to. Someone, who you're attracted to has nothing to do with how you identify, within your gender. And so a cis person can be bisexual. A trans person can be bisexual. So the sexual options are, you can be heterosexual, that means attracted to a person of the opposite sex. And that includes a trans person or cis people. You can be gay, you can be homosexual. We don't really use that term anymore, but a gay or lesbian attracted to people of the same sex. You can be pansexual, which is attracted to anyone, regardless of sex, of their sexual orientation. You can be bisexual, attracted to both binary male or female. You can be asexual, attracted without sexual attraction. Those are kind of the key components of sexuality. But whether you're trans or cis, your sexuality is a very separate part of you.
How would you describe a person who tends to be, okay, a male who is, when they talk to another male, interacts with them as if you're gay male, and when they talk to a female, interacts with them as if you are a lesbian? Does that make any sense to you?
Sorry, I'm not following you.
Okay. I'm not going to say who it is, but this would be a bisexual male who, when they talk to a male, they treat the male as if it's a gay relationship. And when they talk to a female, it's not a heterosexual relationship, it's a lesbian relationship.
You know, I don't think I'm going to address that, because it just, I'm not even sure where to go with all of that, David. It seems very personal and specific, and you know, I think how we identify our social relationships is very sometimes personal and specific.
It kind of goes, all journeys are different regardless of who we are. And I think that's maybe going to that point, is it may just be those specific people playing out, you know, their journeys.
Right.
Yeah. Does anyone, we're out of time, unless someone has a really burning question. This has been so phenomenal, Suzanne, so informative. Thank you so much. You know, I'm going to do our closing intention. And
I want to apologize for taking up all the question time. I didn't mean
no, not at all. Not at all. I will, if there is someone else, and I'm sure Suzanne, if you wanted to email Suzanne, she'd be happy to answer any other further questions. Highly recommend her book. It was phenomenal. So with that being said, does anyone have last questions? Okay, I'm going to honor our time then. So if you please close your eyes. As we close our time together, with gratitude to all, we pause to offer love and kindness. May our understanding of love be expanded by what we have shared as we open ourselves to growth. May we rest in trust and surrender ourselves and our paths to divine grace, asking that this time together be protected, corrected, and held high. May we now see through love's eyes and understand beyond words. May we all be safe, happy, and healthy. May we all rest in full joy and know that there is no distance between friends in time or space. Divine strength and peace surround us until we meet again. Open your eyes, and now for final announcements, over to Lisa.
Thanks so much again, Suzanne, for a great informative evening. So just to recap, Suzanne's top 3 learnings from her journey that she wanted to share with everyone is: number 1, love unconditionally, regardless of how different a loved one is from you or from who you want them to be. Number 2, regardless of how a person expresses their gender or any other aspect of themselves, they are who they are. Their core does not change when they change how they express themselves. And finally, be respectful of the choices others make for their own lives. You don't have to agree with their choices. You just need to behave respectfully. Love that. Thanks, Suzanne. In our LeeLa highlights email, which will go out tomorrow, we'll be sending Suzanne's contact information. So her email, her website, and details about where you can purchase her book. Currently, it's on Amazon, Indigo, and her website, whengendersinquestion.com. And she'll actually send you an autographed copy if you order it from there. Suzanne hosts monthly dialogues that are interactive and invite people to share their questions and thoughts. So if you want to be a part of that conversation, just send Suzanne an email and she'll add you to the mailing list. And finally, Suzanne is available to be a public speaker and trainer regarding the topics around her book. So you can contact her again if you're interested to set that up. If you are interested in learning more about Lee's breakthrough coaching sessions, her information and contact details will be included as well. And lastly, our next LeeLa event will be held on Wednesday, September 22nd with Tanya Cordy, founder of Time and Space Solutions. She is a life and business design coach. Our spaces and how we spend our time are a mirror reflection of what's going on inside ourselves. Tanya will engage with us in a conversation about how to better understand these reflections and how we can make changes in all aspects of our lives. And until next time, everyone, be well, aloha, and good night. Thank you.
Wonderful stuff. This was so great. This was so great. Just super. Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you, and thank you for all the beautiful comments in the chat. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you thank you. This has been really wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.